Hello, welcome back to Dave's Movie Diary. I'm wondering if a film can really capture what Australia was like at the time it was made. I've been thinking about that while watching Don's Party from 1976, because this isn't just a film about a bunch of Australians getting together to watch an election. It's a film about a particular Australia. It's set on the night of the 1969 federal election. There was a stage play made in 1971, and this film was made in 1976. It was a stage play created by David Williamson. So we're already looking at one period of Australian life through the eyes of another. But watching it now, nearly 50 years later, I found myself recognising things. The clothes, the houses, the language, the drinking, the politics, the way people interacted. And I watched it with my parents because I thought it might bring back some memories for them. They laughed so hard. So I'm going to leave that question hanging. Can a film actually capture what a country was like at a particular moment in time? I'll come back to that later on. So my connection to Don's Party is that Dad used to reference this film a lot. I remember it being talked about before I saw the film. So even in the early to mid 80s, Dad always sort of referenced this movie in a knowing way, like, it's pretty wild. And at some point I saw it, but it didn't stick with me. I don't think I had enough context at the time to really get it. It just seemed like an old movie with people like my parents' age getting together. So I didn't have enough cultural understanding at the time. So I decided to put it on last night with my parents because I thought the setting and the actors in it might trigger some memories for them, give them some nostalgia. It sure did. But it also triggered memories for me, interestingly enough, because I'm born in the early 70s, and obviously I wasn't around in 1969 when the film set. But a lot of the world represented in this film carried through into the Australia that I grew up in chiefly in the 70s, but even some of it hung around until the early 80s. Some of the fashions, the houses for sure, some of the attitudes, and that's good and bad, and the way people interacted. And that's one of the reasons the film became more interesting to me as I watched it. So what actually happens at Don's Party? Don Henderson, played by John Hargreaves, is a school teacher, and he's hosting a party at his suburban home on the North Shore of Sydney with his wife Kath, election night in 1969. Don and most of his friends are supporters of the Labor Party, and they're expecting Labor to win. Now, it's interesting, Don is a school teacher. Traditionally, it is teachers that have been Labor Party supporters. The party is ostensibly about celebrating that victory. Kath is already somewhat sceptical about the whole thing because she knows what these parties can become. There's so much grog. Don, before the party, Don is putting all the grog out in the sink out in the laundry. It's overflowing. It's everywhere. There's food that, of course, commensurate with the time, she's having to prepare all the food. And there's a group of friends about to come over all of whom have plenty of baggage of their own. So they're getting ready, and then the guests start arriving, including Don's university mentor, Mal. He, played by Ray Barrett, he arrives with his wife, Jenny. Now, Mal is extremely political, the most political character in the film, and he's very outspoken, very confident, very sure of himself. Then there's Mac, played by Graham Kennedy, recently separated from his wife and has his own problems. He's trying to deal with with the separation by showing a photograph of his wife naked and posting it up on the wall. He thinks that that's the best way to go about it. Mal, I forgot to mention, has also done a very artistic line drawing of a naked woman, traced, we find out, from a copy of Playboy. So we're talking about some some high thinkers here, some elite thinkers. Cooley arrives with his very young girlfriend, Susan, who's only 19. She immediately attracts attention because she's young and she's attractive, considerably younger than most of the people at the party. And Cooley doesn't seem to be that possessive of her. He's already eyeing off others, including Kerry, played by Candy Raymond, an attractive artist who arrives with her partner, Evan. And then we have Simon and Jodie, Simon played by Graham Blundell, who are the Liberal voters. They definitely stand out. That becomes very important. And so, like I said, everyone's expecting Labor to win, but as the night wears on, the election isn't going the way they expect, and as the results come in, the mood starts to change. Probably would have anyway, but I think the election trend really helps things along. And when Simon and Jodie admit that they've actually voted Liberal, because up until then they're sort of saying, "Oh, we're neutral, we don't really care," they're not exactly welcomed with open arms. And Jodie even seems to enjoy provoking the others by suggesting that Labor isn't going to win, but she can get away with it. She's an attractive blonde. The political disagreement becomes increasingly personal, and the drinking's just... We're talking about 1969 drinking in Australia. So the conversations were already pretty honest without the alcohol, but they get a lot more honest and more aggressive, and then old resentments start to surface, and people are really getting down and talking about their relationships, the failures, their jobs, their ambitions, and absolutely about their sex lives. And what initially looks like a group of educated, politically engaged friends starts to reveal something much messier underneath. And lots of things are happening. Susan propositions Don, and he's pretty happy with that. He's not so happy when she suggests that she'll discuss it with his wife. And to her credit, she does. She's upfront about it. The result doesn't go the way she's expecting, and that's a reflection for her. They do get into it outside around the corner, and then they're interrupted by Mal, and he's feeling left out because he's been trying it on with Kerry, the artist, to no avail. She's told him that he doesn't have any sex appeal, as does Susan. So that flares him up a bit. And this is where the boundaries of the party start disappearing, and the film starts moving beyond simply being a political comedy. It's really exposing the attitudes of these people in general. And then the result becomes increasingly clear. Labor isn't going to deliver the victory everyone expected. They keep drinking. The arguments are more intense. There's some sexual tomfoolery happening. There's definitely some jealousy. Then there's some more confrontations. And then they decide to go to the neighbour's swimming pool. And Susan's stripped naked and thrown in by the fellas. They also strip off and jump in with her. Pretty typical of a 1969 party, or a 1970s party, really. So what started as an election celebration becomes a pretty brutal examination of all these people's relationships and insecurities and attitudes. But the important thing isn't really who ends up with whom. It's what the party reveals about all of these people. John Hargraves, as I said, as Don Henderson of Don's party, hosting, supposedly the centre of the gathering, but not really. Loses control of everything as the night progresses, and his flirtation with the young girl, she leads it, but he's a more than willing participant. Becomes increasingly revealing, and he's confronted by Kath, his wife, played by Jeannie Drynan, She's watching the whole thing unfold. They've got a young, he looks like he's about two-year-old or 1-year-old asleep somehow through all the revelry. She's expecting, I think. So she's more grounded than most of the people around her, and her reactions really help us see how ridiculous some of the other characters, chiefly the guys, have become. She's nearly like our avatar as the viewer. Ray Barrett as Mal, like I said, he's the alpha, extremely political, but thinks he's a pretty good sort, even though he's getting on a bit. He tries it on with a few of the ladies to no avail. That fires him up. Then Labor's losing the election, and he starts to confront people, including Simon, who's come out as a Liberal voter. Pat Bishop as Jenny, Mal's long-suffering wife, doesn't get any attention from him anymore. Her career hasn't panned out. She has a good, deep and meaningful chat with Don, and we get a good insight into, I guess, some middle-aged relationships through her. Graham Kennedy as Mac, probably has the most iconic fashion selection at the party. Shorts, the knee-high socks, and the sandals. That really was a thing. All through the 70s and even into the early parts of the 80s, sadly, that look survived. I don't know how. It is so bad. So bad. But Graham Kennedy as Mac, kind of just playing himself. He was one of the biggest television personalities in Australian history, and at this point in time, he was the king of Australian television. He was winning Logies. He was on prime time. Seeing him in this role is fascinating. When you know a bit more about him, like I do, seeing him as a bit of a ladies' man in this film is quite interesting. But yeah, he's pretty well cast in this character. Harold Hopkins as Cooley pops up in The Club. He's the star player in that film, which I talk about in a previous pod. And he's the young stud. He's loud. He's a lawyer, and he knows he's a pretty good sort, and he's confident, and he's constantly talking about his sexual exploits. And he eventually makes a move for Kerry, the artist, who a few of the others have had a go at and didn't get anywhere. He actually does get somewhere, and that's quite an interesting scene. They get interrupted partway through the act, and then later in the film, he also gets interrupted when he's with Susan. So he has a very frustrating night, but very well played by Harold Hopkins in that character. Very believable. Geez, I've known a few blokes like him in my time as well, so could really relate to being around that sort of character. Claire Binney is Susan. She plays Cooley's 19-year-old girlfriend. And like I said, she's considerably younger than the other people at the party, causes a stir, wears a low-cut number that gets everyone's attention. And Cooley doesn't seem that possessive of her, but her presence definitely adds another layer to the sexual atmosphere already developing at the party. And her presence changes the behaviour of people around her. She really becomes part of the reason the party starts becoming uncomfortable. The scene where she gets thrown in the pool obviously gets the attention of the other partners, the women, rightly so. Yes, very interesting character. Graham Blundell as Simon. He's stereotyped here as the nervous accountant, Liberal supporter, one of the people who admits to voting Liberal. His costume party misunderstanding. He comes in sort of like I don't know whether it's some sort of African explorer with a safari suit and a pipe. I'm not sure what the get-up was, whether it was a professor look. But I could relate to that. I can remember my parents and I going to a party in the late 80s when I was 16, 17, that had been billed as a fancy dress party, New Year's Eve party. We got there we were the only ones that took it seriously. Everyone else was just in casual attire. Um, that was pretty embarrassing. Not as much for me, probably, but probably for my parents. So yeah, he's perfectly cast. Well known for Alvin Purple here in Australia. Again, a sexually liberated film, that one. Veronica Lang as Jodie, Simon's partner. She's also shown up wearing a very, what do you want to say? Like a classical, very stylish outfit that's way a few levels up from what the other ladies are wearing. She also gets a lot of attention. She's very attractive, but she's more confident than her husband, and she ends up deliberately provoking the Labor supporters. But they ride with it because they think they're a chance with her. Candy Raymond as Kerry, the attractive artist, very striking looking woman. I recognised it, but I couldn't realise from where. Then I realised I'd seen her not long ago in The Money Movers, and later in Prisoner, the iconic Aussie TV show that ran for about 10 years here. She was in that. Really familiar face from that period. She wants to be like a free spirit, not tied down. She throws it in her husband's face, really, when she goes off with Cooley. She's happy with that. She's really going with that late 60s vibe. And Kit Taylor is Evan, Kerry's partner. He's very possessive. His relationship definitely adds another layer of tension. He's very uptight. He knows that she is very attractive. He knows that he's punching above his weight, and he can see the guys circling around her, which is the way it would play out. Directed by Bruce Beresford. What a director! He had this film in 1976, The Money Movers in 1978, which was another fantastic little local movie. 1980, he had The Club, which I've already talked about in another pod, but he also had Breaker Morant, which is a classic Australian film. I remember watching that in high school here. We read the play that it's based on. Just a titan of Australian cinema at the time. And he was incredibly good at capturing Australia. Not postcard Australia, but the actual Australia. The workplaces, the sporting behaviour, the class differences. We've got them, don't worry about that. The language, the good and the bad. Then he went off to Hollywood and became a major international director there as well. Directed Tender Mercies with Robert Duvall, which was a big deal. Crimes of the Heart, Driving Miss Daisy, again, got a lot of Oscar attention. The point is that you can see the foundations of his career in this extraordinary run of Australian films in the mid to late 70s. He really captured the times perfectly. The politics are front and centre in this movie. Labor versus Liberal. Everyone expecting Labor to win. The Liberal supporters are mocked and attacked for their naivety, but then aggressively later on, when it looks like they've actually voted for the winners. Politics isn't just a background decoration here. It really drives the entire evening, along with the sexual politics as well. And looking back to around these times and even into the 80s and 90s, politics in Australia was much more clearly divided, because Labor was much more associated with workers, the teachers, the unions. Liberal was certainly associated with the big end of town and conservatism. And elections did produce obvious changes and had real outcomes, good and bad, for people. So this came out in 76, the year after the dismissal of Gough Whitlam. Very turbulent time in Australian politics. And the Fraser government went on to rule until 1983. That was a major election in Australian history, with Bob Hawke's government taking over, and Hawke and Keating, floating the dollar, deregulating the economy, really opening up Australia to international competition, and that was good and bad at the time. And then, on into the 90s, when we had the GST, the goods and services tax, come in. But I'm not pretending to be a political historian here, but this is just how politics looked to me growing up. It really did matter, and people had definite views on politics and seemed to be rusted on voters for either side of the divide. So this film really shows why that is. This film also shows the attitudes towards sex and nudity of the 60s and at least to the mid-70s and probably later. There's an extraordinary amount of nudity and sexual activity in this film. The difference is that most of it's male, full frontal nudity, and that is different. There's a lot of just about every bloke in this film gets his trousers off, and you see the whole lot, more than the women in this film, and that I can't remember that happening. Very unusual. And then we've got the wife swapping. This was a thing. It gets talked about, especially in the film The Ice Storm. I remember that film in the late 90s with Kevin Kline. But here in Australia, it was a thing. And how do I know this? Because 2 doors up from where I lived, we had neighbours that got into this. And they got into it, and it didn't end well for one half of that foursome. The husband suggested it with his guests, and it was agreed to. They ended up getting married. The other two tried it for a while. It didn't work out, so they went their own way. This was a thing. And this film shows it, and probably shows how badly it might have been approached at times. It also shows you sexual propositioning, late 60s Australia style, and on into the 70s. There was no dancing around it. The question was just put there: are you up for this? It shows you too the treatment of women by men, and the way that they just go along with it in this film for the most part is revealing as well. That's definitely changed, and for the better. But this film's honest. That did go on, it still goes on, but it's just not acceptable now, and it's not to the same degree. So this gives you a real sense of 70s excess. So again, total honesty from all involved. This also shows you what an Australian party might have looked like in those times. The bluntness of the conversations, often delivered in a humorous way or for humorous effect, doesn't always land, but that's the intention. Calling a spade was a real thing back then, much more than it is now. And again, pros and cons with that. Everyone knew where they stood, but sometimes you're better off knowing. And some of the insults are pretty damning. Fueled by a lot of grog, of course, and then you get the arguments, you get the fights, you get the sexual hijinks, which happened, all in this one night in Lower North Shore, Sydney. People losing control. It looks authentic. In saying that, I don't remember my parents' parties being this extreme, or the circles they travelled in, and they travelled in similar circles to this. But I do remember the attitude, and it wasn't far off. People were more direct, more openly sexist, and mansplaining was just 101. That was everywhere. People would say things to your face and you had to deal with it on the spot. You didn't get a text. You got it said to you in front of a lot of other people. So while the film is exaggerated for comedy, black comedy, it's not that much. And in some cases, it's not exaggerated at all. So this does show an Australia that I definitely remember, being born in the early 70s. The fashions, the house, the decor, the furniture, the feeling of the suburban home, the barbecue, the burnt chops. We've all done that. I've done that. The pool, people being thrown in, the party completely losing control. It's a time capsule. All that stuff still goes on, but it seemed to be more normalised back in this time. And of course, what leaps out to me watching an Aussie film from back then is Australia without technology. Obviously, no mobile phones. We're a good 30 years off decent mobile phones. No internet, no social media. Everyone's actually talking to each other. Good and bad outcomes with that. But I do find myself feeling nostalgic for that as an old bloke now. So I do remember these times with affection where you had to interact with people in the here and now. So it does make me wonder if we've gone too far in the other direction with technology. I know it's unavoidable, but it does seem that people are siloed more than they ever were. It was fun watching this with my folks who are in their 80s. I thought it would be too wild. I just put it on and I was going to see what happened. They loved it. They laughed throughout the whole thing. They recognised specific things. They remembered the period. So it triggered a lot of nostalgia for them. And like I said, we ended up discussing people we actually knew who experienced some of the things depicted in the movie. So it had a real effect, and that tells me something about the authenticity. There's lots of other films. When I thought about it, I started making a list of other films that captured their time or the dynamic. Ones that stand out for me include Wake in Fright from 1971. That's a bleak outlook about Australian masculinity and drinking. But again, sadly, it was pretty spot on. Mad Max from 79. Again, lots of masculinity in that one. The worries about nuclear war, that dystopian society that we all thought was maybe on the way. Gallipoli from 1981. To me, it really sums up Australian identity and mateship better than any other film. It also depicts an Australia of 1915 to what I imagine it was. Nothing feels out of place there. Not that I'd know. I wasn't around in 1915, but it looks so authentic. Even things from Crocodile Dundee about the Australian image of itself, how unrealistic that could be at times, but it was how we projected ourselves internationally with confidence in the 80s. Strictly Ballroom in 92 really showed, I think, suburban Australia and how we've conformed and how we can break out at times in little ways. Muriel's Wedding, similar. But The Castle in 1997 is probably the clearest example about ordinary Aussies, family, suburbia, day-to-day concerns, the vibe. It was a film where Australians watching it could really look at the screen and say, I know these people. But I feel like Bruce Beresford films do the same. The Money Movers, The Club, Breaker Morant, this film. This film in particular, because it's set in suburbia. It's people just doing normal things. So I do think most of these iconic films captured Australia really well. So this rewatch was a lot more enjoyable than I expected. I thought it would be maybe too much for my folks. But what I found personally was a really funny film, very raunchy, political, a definite cultural time capsule, something nostalgic, especially for my folks, but even for me too. It's great to be able to share a film like this with your folks. Interestingly, I do think it's a date film if you've got an open-minded date, because it's full of sex and jokes, and it's really entertaining, really funny. There's plenty to talk about. There might be differing opinions on how much things have changed or not. Hangover film, for sure. It's 90 minutes. It's fast moving. It's funny. Doesn't overstay its welcome. It ticks a lot of bases. So you can watch it with a buddy for sure, especially if you're Australian. It's probably better with people, though, to be honest. It's one of those films like The Castle. So it's a trifecta. I do think films can capture Australia. This one really captures it, and my parents backed that up. But I don't think it's unique to this film. I do think it's captured in all those other ones that I talked about. But my parents watched this and they were seeing their Australia. I was watching it and seeing pieces of the Australia that I grew up in. And that probably answers the question, I think. A film doesn't have to objectively represent an entire country. It just has to capture something real about the people who live there, and Don's Party definitely does that. So, look, this was a much more enjoyable watch and a far better film than I was expecting. I should have known better because it was a Bruce Beresford film. It's so Australian, so outrageous and uncomfortable in parts, but it's just what Australia was like. And Bruce Beresford was clearly one of the filmmakers who understood how to put Australian life on screen without making it feel artificial. He did it time and time again. So really glad that I watched Don's Party from 1976. Highly recommend it. It's on a couple of different platforms at the moment. It's on Mubi here in Australia, but it's also on another. I think it was Prime, Amazon Prime. I always get those two mixed up. Anyway, so it's getting a bit of a second life now. A good 50 years on, so maybe 50 years later is a really appropriate time to watch a film like this. So that's it. Thanks again for listening in, and see you next time.